Jacqui, thank you so much for chatting with me today. Welcome to the Bodies Built Better podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's so great to be here and finally meet.
I know, followed each other on Instagram. It's very cool when this happens. You get to finally speak in person, well, like person through a screen.
Yeah, virtually. No, it's been great. I mean, I consult typically online through Zoom anyway, so it's pretty natural to do this and meet awesome. This way.
Yeah, well, speaking of consults, you speak about gut health. You're a nutritionist, and I'm really pumped to talk about gut health because I feel like it's a topic that can get really overcomplicated, and there are so many companies out there that, you know, are out there selling their superfood powders and this supplement and that, and sometimes I think it's best to really get back to basics. So I'm looking forward to chatting all things gut health with you today. But before we do, to get started, I'd love to know your journey, because I know you have a gut health journey that got you into this.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was actually my son's diagnosis with celiac disease when he was 5 that kind of got me interested in this field, and made me study this degree. So medical science is my background. So that kind of was the catalyst initially for starting that. So he started presenting with brain fog. You know, he was at school, he was unable to read. That was all going backwards. He was tired all the time, even though he was sleeping like 11 hours a day. Or at night, and then he was bruising really easily as well. So we knew that something wasn't right. And fortunately, we had a really good GP at the time, and they picked up that diagnosis quite quickly, which made it a lot easier. Not everybody is that fortunate. And so then I. Few years later, I started studying, and it was all kind of went from there, and here I am. So out practicing as a nutritionist, but yeah, a little bit broader than that because of the medical science background. I guess there's a lot more to it, and things that I can help with. So gut health is one of my passions and things that I like to really help with, because I think it is a cause for a lot of issues that I see in women that I am treating. And, you know, if we're not looking at that, and especially their diet, we're really not addressing the root cause. So that's kind of why I do what I do.
Can you tell us for a second what is celiac disease? Because I feel like we hear all these terms and don't really have an understanding of what they are and how they can affect us.
Yeah, so it's an autoimmune condition. So it affects approximately 1 in 70 Australians. So it's not all that common, but what it is an issue absorbing, or it's a reaction to the gluten protein. So people with celiac disease need to steer away from gluten for their whole life. There is no cure currently for that. And so that's why things like will be labeled gluten-free, but there'll also be like a may contain statement on the back of some foods that they also need to steer away from too. So when they ingest gluten, it sets off that immune response. So they're getting a lot of inflammation within the gut, and that can hinder absorption of key nutrients. So we typically see them present with things like low iron, B12, and vitamin D, which is particularly important because then we see issues with calcium absorption. And so they can have like tooth enamel defects. They can have issues with bones breaking, like my son did. So yeah, that's kind of was another thing how we picked that up. But yeah, so it's quite fascinating, again, because there's so many different symptoms that people can present with. It's not always the typical like gastrointestinal, like you're bloating and pain. Some people, like will wake up in the middle of the night. They can have insomnia. They can have aching legs. There's brain fog. Issues with bowels, obviously, they can be either really, really quick, or they can be really slow. It does affect everybody differently. And then some people have no symptoms at all, and we just pick it up through, progressively having low iron. So,
And when you found that out, how long did it take before, you started seeing the difference in him? after having changed diet and whatever you did?
Yeah. Well, initially, I guess for him, it was probably four weeks. We started to see changes within his skin and his face. He's looking a little bit brighter. Those dark circles under his eyes were improving. But overall, then we started to see things like his running. So cross country, that improved. That took about 12 months. So the year before, he came second last, and then he came fifth the next year. So we saw those like big changes in performance, which was great. And he was only 6 at the time, so quite young. And now it's something that we manage, and he plays basketball and things like that. So we still got to be mindful of diet, which I particularly like working with athletes as well, because there's so many things that we can do there to improve performance. Just looking at the specifics of their diet and maybe conditions that they might have or may be prone to developing.
So let's get down to basics. What is the gut?
Well, it's the biggest organ that we have in our body, so it's the whole gastrointestinal tract. So from our mouth all the way through. It's very, very important. Essentially, what we're using it for is for digesting food in a very small nutshell, and absorbing food and then excreting it. It is a lot more complex than that, though, for majority of people. So it's not always what goes in and comes out. We've got to be a little bit more specific. Look at, if there are absorption issues, if you have any underlying deficiencies there, and things that we can tailor food to help with your gut, and make sure that is optimal.
Okay, so what is good gut health, and why is that important?
Oh, well, it's important for our overall health. So everything from performance, if you're sporting inclined, immune health, obviously, as well. What else have we got? Like I said, that overall health. So if we have a happy, healthy, balanced microbiome, then everything kind of functions well. We have good hormonal production. So everything there is, well. We don't have issues typically with metabolic disease. So it really does underlie a lot of key things there.
Yeah. And you mentioned that the gut starts from the mouth, the top end. Yeah. So tell us more about that digestive process, and break that down for us.
Yeah, so obviously, they say you eat with your eyes. So what we're seeing first,
I do that too often and end up having too much on my plate. Like, my eyes are way bigger than my stomach.
We are all guilty of that. Absolutely. It's always the good things that get us too. But yeah, like you do, that kickstarts that digestive process. It gets those salivary glands working. We're hungry, gets that appetite, building up. And then obviously we're ingesting. So we're chewing, we're breaking those foods down. And then as it moves, further down the gastrointestinal tract, we, our body starts to break down that food. So we see those chemical reactions start to occur, and things start to be absorbed into the bloodstream and then passed out the other end. So it doesn't have to be that complex. I don't know. It does depend on who I'm working with. If we really delve into it that deeply or not. People sometimes just like to understand the basics of it, and I guess learn a little bit more about their condition and what's important to them.
Yeah,
typically. Yeah,
obviously it is, and well, it is really complex. When we're talking digestion, what can disrupt that entire process?
A lot of the common ones that I see, so your microbiome imbalance, so an imbalance there within that gut health bacteria, things like medications, so that can range from antibiotics if you've been recently unwell, or you are finding yourself unwell quite frequently and you have that recurring, antibiotic use. non-steroidal anti-inflammatories are quite a big one there as well, and they're quite common for a lot of people. And then some of the other, so like an antidepressant, again, is becoming more and more prescribed. And over time, we do see some key nutrients change. So things like B12, I like to keep an eye on. Again, that iron and things within the gut with those. Otherwise, we've got things like parasites, obviously food intolerances, if you're prone to those, and not understanding, the symptoms that you may be getting from those foods that you're ingesting. And then lack of variety in diet, and that's a big one as well. So sometimes people just either they're reacting to food, so they're just excluding it from their diet completely, but also we also have people who just don't eat those foods because they might not like them, or they've never grown up with it in their diet, or they might be following a plan through another professional or someone at the gym, and it's quite restricted, so they're having like your sweet potato and broccoli and chicken or steak, like it's just quite repetitive. So, and that can also be detrimental for gut, if regardless they're still good foods, but we're lacking that variety there. So yeah, it's quite broad. There's a lot of things that can go on. It is different for everybody, depending, if you do have issues with it or not. Yeah, and stress. I didn't mention stress. That's a huge one as well. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get to stress in a moment.
Yeah.
Because there's a big topic. That's one thing for me in terms of that variety, because I am such a routine person, and as soon as I find something that works, I'm literally having the same meal every night. And I realize now that, that's also not good, even though I'm having my broccoli and my cauliflower and some carrots, brown rice. There really needs to be variety.
Yeah, and I find the varieties easier in summer. I know that sounds really bizarre, but because we typically have lighter meals, so we're having a lot more salads, with on a barbecue typically, I find, up here in North Queensland. But it's an easy way to mix it up. We can use different leafy greens. We can add in, either vegetables. We can add in more capsicum and cucumber and red onion, all these other good foods, and then add meat on top of that. So there's so many great ways to get that variety in, I find, in summer over winter, because you typically have those hearty meals. You stick to the staples like your potato, your carrot, broccoli, cauliflower. And so sometimes you're just missing some of the greens. So I have a really good loaded salad recipe, which I love. And so you can still have those like key veggies, roast them up, but have them, mix them through the greens as well, and have it with the meat. It's fantastic. And you're getting a lot more plants on your plate than just meat and veg. So that's a good way to do it.
Yeah. And going back to the medications, I work with a lot of athletes, and yes, we deal with some inflammation, joint inflammation, and sometimes they are on the anti-inflammatories so they can get through the training and keep performing. What is that doing?
Yeah, so it's different for everybody.
Sure.
Absolutely. You've got to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
But
you preface every answer with, it depends. And
yeah. Got to keep that all above board.
Exactly.
But it takes its toll on the gut. Okay. So if you're using them for a prolonged amount of time, so we're looking, greater than 6 to 12 months for most people. And sometimes it's a lifestyle thing. If it's a chronic injury or chronic pain that they're dealing with, it's quite a long time. So then we want to look at maybe what's going on, inflammation and things, and ways that we can maybe manage that through diet as well to limit that dose, because that also is quite possible. It's something that I work a lot with, and people are very surprised at the foods that sometimes can be exacerbating those symptoms, which they didn't really think of. So one of the big ones there would be dairy in a lot of people. Now, it's not bad by any means. It is quite a good source of food, but if they're on these medications and it's creating issues within the gut, and they're having, the bloating that they're getting, bowel changes, things like that, if we can look at things like your dairy, maybe they're having too much red meat during the week, we can kind of just change it up a bit and see if we can better manage their symptoms.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, let's get on to stress, because I feel like the last 18 months to nearly 2 years now, stress has been a big part of everyone's life with the global pandemic. What does stress do to the gut and our health?
It is a massive problem at the moment, isn't it, off the back of COVID and everything else. So in the early days, with stress, what we typically find, the first thing to go out is your sleep. And most people don't necessarily recognize that as a sign of stress, is what I've found. So they might have a little bit of difficulty switching off at night. So they're alert a lot later in the evening. So they might come home from work tired, they get home at 5, 6 o'clock, and then they get this second wind of energy and they can't switch off till 10, 10:30, 11 o'clock. Then they might wake up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. So they're getting that disrupted sleep. And so then when they wake up in the morning, they're already really tired. So that's kind of the first thing that I see become out of balance. Now, obviously, there's your things like irritability and the moodiness that come in with the stress as well. And as that progresses and I guess prolongs, we see changes within the gut, because if you're tired, and that stress response is there, that's obviously changing cortisol production within the body, so our stress hormone. We're seeing that being produced a lot more regularly. So it's becoming like this stable level rather than having that, big rise in the morning to wake us up and dipping in the evening to put us to sleep. And when we see that happen with the gut, so we can see things like digestion be off. So typically a lot of people then have issues with the secretion. So we're not getting enough digestive secretions to break down the foods. So then they're not hungry, or things aren't agreeing with them. So then they start avoiding food, and it kind of just can be a flow-on effect from there in terms of nutrition. And so I start really simply with just a small meal when they're waking, within like the 30 minutes of waking, if possible, whether that be a piece of toast, a piece of fruit, a smoothie. Obviously there's a lot more better options nutritionally, but typically if you're waking and you're not hungry, you just got to start small, whatever that is that your body feels like, and get that cortisol and stress back in check. Not to spike it with a coffee first thing in the morning. I know that's easy to do. And then we set it up and go from there.
And speaking of, I guess, stress, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, will turn to some comfort foods. And I really like my pastas, or, I'll have a veggie burger at times. And when that happens, I can, whether it's at a lunchtime or in the evening, I can tend to feel really kind of sleepy and almost lethargic afterwards. Does this mean I should be avoiding that, or why is that?
Absolutely not. Not necessarily avoiding it, but I like to look at why. So whether or not that might be a blood sugar imbalance, whether or not it is potentially a sign of a food intolerance there. So if it is happening with pasta and burgers and maybe those heavier carbohydrate and refined options, it could, potentially be wheat or a gluten intolerance there, or something else there. Or it could be so something like a gut microbiome imbalance, and then we look at how that's the gut is being able to digest those starches and things, and maybe that's what's causing those symptoms. So it is, like I said, it's always so very different for everybody. It is quite difficult to talk, I guess, broadly, unless we're talking about a case study as such. But blood sugar imbalance is one of the most common ones that I see. Now, what I would typically do there is we obviously look to correct that. So small regular meals if you're not already doing that. But managing that carbohydrate load throughout the day. So, you know, you may not you might be over consuming those. So may be having like lots with breakfast and then lunch and then dinner. And maybe we can break that up a little bit to see if you'd still have those symptoms or not. So yeah, there's different ways that we can that we approach it. But yeah, absolutely, cutting it out is not the answer. And I find that a lot of people fall into that trap then by doing that, and it's not necessarily that food's issue. So yeah, some of the simple ways around that would be a probiotic. So I quite like to throw those in just to help. So obviously there's different strains, but they help to feed that good bacteria within the gut, create those short chain fatty acids, keep inflammation down, and yeah, it kind of helps all round with those side of things. So just depending.
Amazing. We'll talk on probiotics in a moment. In terms of symptoms, though, I feel like bloating and constipation are like the symptoms that we most commonly hear when we're talking about gut health. Or on the other hand, potentially even diarrhea. So we're going one way or the other. What are other symptoms when we're talking about gut health? Because we know the common ones. What else could we be experiencing that we don't even know are actually related to the gut?
Yeah, and I love that question. And it's one of the things I love explaining to people, and I love watching that reaction when they realize it's all related to their food, especially when we make changes and they see improvements. So what I typically find are things like joint pain. So mimicking things like arthritis, stiff joints. Obviously, you've got the brain fog and fatigue component, which a lot of people put down to their busy lifestyle. Can be from their food as well. Then we have skin manifestations, so we can see things like eczema or dermatitis, these weird recurring rashes that they might have had their whole life, but it can be a symptom of a food intolerance. And then obviously, so you've got your bowel issues there, your normal gastrointestinal, so you've got abdominal pain, that bloating, smelling breath is one of the lesser talked about things, but a very big giveaway that something is off there if your breath isn't great. And then that's kind of the main one. Sleep, I typically find just a little bit restless sleep. Yeah.
I definitely have noticed that with myself in the past.
Oh, no.
Like when I go to bed, my gut just doesn't feel right, that bloatedness. My sleep, definitely restless, and wake up in the morning just like I could sleep another 10 hours. It'd be nice. That's
massive. Hey, a lot of people wake up just feeling really, really tired. And again, if we're pinpointing intolerances in foods, I eliminate them first, and then we look to reintroduce them to test, the symptoms that they are getting and whether or not it is a true reaction. So if they're getting that joint pain flare back up, that fatigue, especially in the morning, that really, really heavy, weighed down, wanting to get out of bed. And another one I didn't mention is mood. So like an anxiety symptoms, which very, very common with certain intolerances there. And that can all be huge, especially at the moment with COVID and the ongoing stress. So there's a lot that we can do there through diet and just calming everything down.
Let's go back to bloating for a second, because I feel like that's probably something that every single person could relate to. They've experienced bloating. What is happening when we experience this? Should we be worried?
Yes. So unless you've eaten like a very high fiber meal, so that could be like even good food, so lots of broccoli and lots of cauliflower, it might just be that you've eaten too much. Your body's unable to break that down all at once. Okay, that's what I'd call a normal response. We'd expect to see that, okay? So what we do is maybe dial back that fiber intake, so your body can break that down a little bit better. But if you're eating things normally like that aren't high in fiber and you're getting those bloating reactions, that's your body's way of saying that something's not right. It's not agreeing with what you've just consumed. And keep in your mind, it doesn't always present immediately. It could be something you've eaten for breakfast and you just slowly, progressively, get that bloating throughout the day. And then, so it can be hard to pinpoint sometimes in a lot of people. But yeah, so there's obviously a lot of gas being made within the stomach through those bacteria. And then, so we look to bring that all back into balance.
That's such an interesting point, in terms of it doesn't happen straight away, and just understanding, what we're consuming throughout the day does play a part in how we're feeling overall, and not pinpointing it to the thing that we just ate, for example.
Yeah.
That's
huge. It really, really is. I think I get a lot of my clients to fill out like a food and mood diary and track symptoms, because for things like obviously moods in the morning, but energy levels, bowel movements, those sort of things, depending on what we're looking at with that, and trying to find that pattern with what they've been consuming and when those symptoms were arising, and if they are related, and going from there. So it is a process of like finding out why it's happening, what's causing it. It's fascinating. It's always different. Every day it's different.
That's right. Super important. And you mentioned bowel movements, so I'd love to talk about poo. What should our poo look like?
Well, I think everybody would be pretty familiar with the Bristol stool chart somehow. But we want a very easy bowel movement. You shouldn't be straining. It should be formed kind of like a sausage, all right? It shouldn't be loose. And typically we don't want to see food particles in there, unless the things, indigestible, so things like corn and that's quite okay if we do see that in there. But that's typically what we want to be seeing there with a stool. And we're looking for 1, maybe 2 times a day. It can be quite common for people for their normal to be every 2nd or 3rd day. That's not great. So we want to look at maybe why. And then a lot of people, that is their normal. They've been like that their whole entire life, and they've never thought of it as an issue. But what we find is those are the people who also have the bloating, that have a lot of wind and other gut health issues. And typically we're finding a lot of food intolerances there, that we can better control those symptoms. Okay. Yeah.
So in an ideal world, in a healthy body, we should be going at least once every single day.
Absolutely. Yeah. Typically you'll find that it will be at the same time every day too, when everything is functioning correctly and working well. Some people that's in the morning, sometimes that's after they've eaten their first meal. It can vary, but you will find that your body will have its own clock.
And what if I feel like you have mentioned it, but we'll go there anyway, just in case people experiencing this, when they look like pebbles, or like you said, they haven't gone or they go every 2nd day. If this is happening every single day, just not eliminating well enough, at what point do we make changes? I mean, it sounds like we should be making changes straight away, but at what point should we start seeking help to change this?
It can be difficult for them, especially if it is something they've dealt with their whole life. But as early as possible, absolutely. So pebbles aren't great. Typically they're a sign, it can just be as simple as dehydration and not having enough fluid in the diet. Really, really simple ways to do it. Sometimes there's not enough fiber or variety there. So it can really, sometimes it's just food. It's not always hormonal related. I do see slow bowels quite commonly with low thyroid in a lot of my patients. So that's a sign and symptom there. So we just look to correct that. But again, that can come back down to digestion and things as well. So we want to make sure that the gut and the liver are working well. Then we'll see a good bowel movement. It's not going to be pebbly. It should ideally, be a good stool. So
good sausage.
Yeah, good. You can't help yourself with puns, can you? Love that.
All right. Well, you mentioned probiotics before. Let's talk about them. Pre and probiotics. Should we be taking them all of the time, every day? Are they more important? Like, when do we introduce these, and when should we be taking them?
Well, so your prebiotic foods, most people should be consuming those every day. So they're high in the good fiber that help our digestive health. Now, so what they also do, they promote the friendly bacteria that we have within our gut. And they're things like onions, leeks, asparagus, garlic. There's things that we typically cook as a base for meals. And then we've got things like your banana, apples, oats, wheat bran. So they're quite broad. A lot of people would have those at some stage, eat daily, ideally. And so they're key prebiotics. So, yeah, a lot of people would be having those. Now, probiotics, they go in, so typically it will come as a supplement, and we take those to promote the good bacteria within our gut. All right, so they're more of the good guys. So it depends. So we don't want to be taking them daily unless there really is a need to. There are a lot on the market, as you said when we started, and there's a lot of prebiotic powders and things like that, and claims on a lot of products. Now, like I said, those key prebiotics, a lot of people get in their diet. So you don't necessarily have to be having powders to help your gut. Sometimes we can be doing more damage by putting too much of the good guys in, and we're not really addressing that balance. We're not clearing out the bad guys. We've still got an overgrowth or too many of the bad bugs, but we're just trying to counteract that by adding in more good guys. So we're not really addressing that cause.
Band-Aid.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Which is what we're not wanting to do. So I guess that's why it's important to speak with a professional and get a treatment plan. Don't just go and self-diagnose, or maybe you have in the past and you're not getting the results that you're after. And then maybe that's time to talk to someone and see if what you're taking is beneficial, or maybe there's something more specific and better that you could be doing.
Yeah, that's great. I didn't even realize that prebiotics you got from your foods. Again, I just
really,
it's pro, get them in a tablet form.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. We get everything from food. It's amazing.
Exactly.
But we do need our body to be working well.
That's it.
To be getting everything out of our food, and the food has to be of good quality too.
Yeah.
So it's not always the case.
Yeah.
So
I have to ask, talking about companies and products, things like your sauerkraut now, they, that's, more at the forefront of, health, and you certainly see them predominantly at health shops now, and things like kombucha. Are these things that are really good for us and that we should be consuming, or are they more of a thing that, we should be consuming every other day? What should we be doing with things like this?
Yeah, so they're great. I always say, if you enjoy it, then absolutely eat it. You know what I mean? Like, it comes back down to you as an individual. We don't want to put you on this strict food plan that things that you don't necessarily like. But I'm going to eat this because it's going to make me feel better. it's never going to be sustainable if we work that way. But things, so those sort of prebiotic rich foods, so the fermented ones, so your sauerkraut, there's kefir, kimchi is another good one, and of course kombucha. Kombucha's been around for forever now. So they're all really good if you like them. The best option is obviously to make it yourself, so you're controlling all the preservatives and things that go in there, because sometimes the ones that we can get, from the supermarket and that, they're designed to last on a shelf for a little while, and they still will if you're making that yourself at home, but you're able to control then what's going in there.
Yeah.
So there are definitely very good products available that we can buy, but we just read the label and choose the best one that you can.
Yeah. All right. Well, speaking of gut bacteria, you mentioned before, what is it and why do we need to take care of it? Or how do we take care of it?
Yeah. So our microbiome is so important for overall health. So that, we have a good and bad bacteria, or what I like to call helpful and maybe unfriendly. So we want to keep those guys in balance. So we want the good guys to be fed and happy and keeping everything, great for immune health, for digestion, absorption of key nutrients. Not really, if we have that imbalance there, we're seeing a lot of inflammation. We see a lot of chronic health conditions start to pop up, and we really want to, keep that in check. Now, I mean, like I just said, it's very important for a lot of things. So if your immune health isn't great, and you're finding that you're unwell all the time, or you're getting this recurring illness, we want to look at why. If it is that simple, of maybe the gut being a little bit out of balance, and things that we can do there to correct that and keep that in check. So my favorite way to do that is through diet, always, in a nutshell, because if you're just taking a product but not really fixing the issue. Okay. So different ways that we can do that. Then, so we look at putting in more of the good guys. So we look at like a detoxification phase, I guess. So maybe more leafy greens, your brassica family of veg, so things like your bok choy, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, those sort of guys. They're great for the liver and the gut and clearing everything out. And then we look to add in good things to help heal the gut, reduce that inflammation, and keep everything fed and happy and functioning well. And that's also where your prebiotics come into it as well. And I guess that's kind of not quite, but that's where the 5 R's come into it. So that protocol that I typically use when we're looking at gut health. So that works around remove. So the 5 R's is remove, replace, repopulate, repair, and rebalance. So we want to remove any stresses. So whether that's through your diet, what's causing the issue there. If we can pinpoint that first, let's identify it. Then we replace. So we want to look at getting those digestive secretions functioning and working well, so you are able to break down the foods that you're consuming. It's not creating any adverse reactions and that there. Then we look to repopulate, and that's where your prebiotics and probiotics come back in. So we're restoring balance to the microbiome. So we're bringing that back in check with good and bad. And then we repair. And so this is where a lot of the gut powders and things like that come in. So we look at slippery elm. What else can we use? There's things like your turmeric, boswellia is great as well. Now, if we do that too early, we're not addressing the cause. And that's where I find a lot of people maybe go and, buy your bone broths and things like that we can all go and buy, but we're missing the first 3 steps. So we're repairing too early without addressing everything else first and foremost. So it's not always that simple. And then after that, then we rebalance. So that's where we look at lifestyle issues. So things like managing stress, making sure you're getting enough sleep every day, looking at overall diet, those sort of things that are easy to control, but sometimes out of our control too. So we're all busy. We all, work. We have kids or commitments, and exercise, sport is a huge one. That's a big stressor on a lot of athletes. So just finding that happy balance. I guess it's very, very important, and it's key to health.
That's it. I love that. You really, it's such a holistic view, and you are treating the person and not just symptoms at the end of the day. And you've mentioned the liver twice now. What is the connection between the liver and the gut?
It's super important. A lot of people forget about the trusty old liver. Now we need it functioning well. The liver is, so obviously people just think of that as eliminating or processing our alcohol.
Exactly.
It's typically what we think of. But also we're looking at removing all toxins. It's crucial for hormonal production. So if that's not functioning well, that's where we see those imbalances or start to arise with hormones, okay, or it's not being produced correctly. Estrogen metabolism is one of the main ones I see in clinic with women. So we're not having, the liver's not doing its job. It's not able to properly metabolize and break down that estrogen. So then it's reabsorbed back into the bloodstream, and we're seeing that imbalance start to occur. So we're having too much estrogen circulating. So one of my favorite ways to support liver health, coming back again to what I just touched on, is that brassica family of veggies. So that bok choy, the Brussels sprouts, broccoli, those things. Now they have a compound in them called sulforaphane, and that's fantastic for the liver. You can get supplements if it's required, absolutely, and good quality ones, absolutely. But if your body is working well, and we can do it through diet, then that's even better. It's the most cost-effective way to do it, but it's most natural. All right, and that's where you're going to see that long-term, support and healing. Yeah,
that's it. We have so much control when we think about it. It's just what we put in our mouth.
Yeah. And look, that's the tricky thing with hormones too, and falling into the trap of just eating the same thing all the time. Our hormones dictate a lot about what we eat, what we feel like, and when I'm in a consult and I go through what people are eating, I'm not there to pick it apart and look at the bad things. I'm more interested in, like, all right, well, you're doing shift work and you're eating a lot of carbohydrates, or maybe you've skipped breakfast and then you're coming home and snacking all afternoon on salty, savory things. That makes sense to me because you haven't filled your body, or we've got this hormone at play. So that's kind of what I look at. It tells me a lot of information from what you are consuming and the time of day. So it's not necessarily just you and lack of willpower.
Yeah,
absolutely not. But it's usually as simple as eating a more varied diet, a good quality breakfast, lots of leafy greens and things like that, but tasty ones. Not just plain
I
food.
must eat this.
Love food. We love food. We live for food. We love traveling and eating good food. So that's the key. If we can make food delicious and you enjoy it, then you feel good. It's so much easier to stick to. And I guess that's why we started doing what we're doing, because it's the advice is great. The advice is there, but the food is just lacking. It's boring. I don't want to eat this like mundane, boring salad. I want to jazz it up a bit. Like, let's make it taste good and make it inclusive. So that's what we aim to do, or I do with a lot of the nutrition plans and things. It's food that is replaced and becomes family favorites. So
exactly, you're setting us up for success when we love the food that we're eating.
Absolutely, you need to. Otherwise, you only do it for a few weeks, and
that's
then
right.
You finish it and fall back into old ways.
Cured.
Yeah, no, it's not that way. Yeah, that's right. So that's what I'm looking to change slowly. Absolutely. And the people that I'm working with, you know, they're seeing these changes, and it's great because their partners and families are as well. And then they're like, you look really good. What's changed? You know, and they're like, oh, I'm eating all this good food, and they're enjoying it, and then they're feeling better. So then they get that motivation and had this big flow-on effect. It's wonderful.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I wanted to talk about, I'm really fascinated by caffeine and the effects that has on the body. And I know everyone is different. And it's crazy because I've heard a lot of different stories that caffeine has. And, you know, some people, you know, like you mentioned before, it's actually the first thing they'll have in the morning. And it's the thing that wakes them up and they feel energized and whatnot. And then some people will go like, I love a coffee, but it makes me feel a bit erratic, get a bit jittery, and, you know, I can focus, but I just have that jitters. And then on the other hand, there are some who will have a coffee because it makes them go to the toilet every day. They think it's that thing that they need to eliminate first thing. And then I've heard people say that they can't have caffeine because it makes them go to the toilet, like explosions, or, you know, just not feel well. So I know that obviously caffeine has all these different effects, but is it something that is not great for the gut, or is it not that simple?
Well, everybody has their own tolerance. So that's why people have those varied responses. It can make some people really erratic. It can increase their anxiety. So I guess it depends on the individual and what we're working with. So if they're presenting with those symptoms, well, we're going to look to maybe not have so much caffeine in their diet. But I always say 1 to 2 max cups of coffee or tea, but before 11 a.m. Okay, that's my thing there. Now, that's purely for a sleep purpose and not adding in any stimulants after then, so we're not hindering sleep. But I always say that because so many people do enjoy it, and it's a lifestyle thing or a social component. You know, they go out maybe after the gym and have a cup of coffee with, you know, their girlfriends. So I don't like to exclude a lot of things. We just look to ways that we can work around it and manage it. But absolutely, if it's causing symptoms, then let's look for an alternative there. And I guess people who are having too much caffeine and they might not realize, so they might be shift workers, or I find a lot of tradesmen actually, so they're having things like the energy drinks throughout the day, but then they're having that impacted sleep. But they haven't pinpointed that it is probably the caffeine in those drinks that are causing it. So we just look to minimize, and then we see those improvements start to happen. But within the gut, it is different for everybody, but it can create a lot of issues. It is a stressor. Obviously, caffeine is speeding up a lot of processes within the body. But too much definitely can have an impact on gut health.
Yeah. So. You mentioned before hormones, and I know you work with people who have autoimmune conditions. If the gut is the root cause of something like Graves' disease, which is, you know, the thyroid, what is happening and how can we manage it?
Yeah, so with the thyroid, so whether it is Hashimoto's or Graves' or any kind of autoimmune disease, what I find is that it is stemming from the gut. There's something there. Obviously, the body is attacking whatever it is. So whether it's rheumatoid arthritis, if it's a thyroid issue, if it's celiac disease, many different things that it can be. One of my favorite ways to control that or manage those symptoms is through a gluten-free diet. Now, it's not for everybody, but there is a lot of research coming out to support a gluten-free diet in managing autoimmune conditions from a dietary perspective. If you go to the GP and are diagnosed with Hashimoto's or Graves', they will quite often, not everybody, but most will say there's not a lot that can be done through diet. And I completely disagree, because there's a lot of symptoms that we can manage and control through diet alone, and that's where it gets interesting in working with the individual, and ways that we can support them. So what we're finding is, like, gluten is a big one. They find that it's causing a lot of like the slow bowel issues that they'd be getting with the thyroid. So with Hashimoto's or the Graves, they have the brain fog, and they see these symptoms start to improve through diet alone. Other things that we can look at, obviously, is increasing the cholesterol side of things. So sometimes we'll see elevated cholesterol for no reason, and that's typically associated with thyroid. So it is quite interesting. It is different, but there's all these little things that we can track and monitor and work with that person. So it's not always straightforward, but yeah, there's so much that we can do with diet for autoimmune conditions, absolutely, and focusing on gut health through food alone, and removing those triggers, and repairing and keeping that nice and strong is a great first step.
Yeah, I think that is so important to mention, because it's so often where we can go to the GP and, it's one of those things where it's like, here's the pill that you should be taking to fix this or whatever it is. And it doesn't take into nutrition, and nutrition is so powerful in how we can help ourselves and make us feel better and heal ourselves. So that's such an important thing to hear from someone like yourself, where nutrition can have such a huge impact on these autoimmune diseases. So massive. This next question, very huge generalist question, but is there the best diet? Is there a best diet for optimal gut health?
Yes. So a varied one.
Yeah.
To keep it really simple. Yeah. So we want lots of plant-based foods in there. So all the good things. So like I keep saying, those leafy greens, those root veggies, your cucumber, your capsicum, red onion, all those sort of things. We want those on your plate. Half of your plate, at least with lunch and dinner. I don't really include that with breakfast, but at least lunch and dinner every day. Salad or vegetables. And then treat your meat as a side. So you want to only be having a quarter of your plate with that source of protein. Keeping in mind this is pretty broad. Obviously, if you're an athlete or you're preparing for something, you might need a little bit more protein. So I'm working with two powerlifters at the moment, and they are completely different. Like we want to be having a lot more carbohydrate rich diet there for them, and a lot more protein. So it is, but as a general rule, lots and lots of plants. Treat your meat as a side, and then carbohydrates, good quality whole grains. So like your brown rice, any of your like potato, sweet potato, those sort of good foods in an unprocessed form is a great way to for overall health. Just a normal food.
Jacqui, this has been awesome. If people want to learn more about you or work with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, so you can visit our website, so the integrativehealthobjective.com.au. Otherwise, I'm on Instagram, so Tiho Nutritionist, and hit us up there. I'm more than happy to help. So if you'd send me a message, we can always figure out what's going on, get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, exactly. Brilliant. Jacqui, to finish this off, I've got one last question for you. For people out there suffering from bloating, what is something they can do right now to start feeling better?
Oh, what can they do right now to start feeling better? What I would do is definitely look at what you're eating throughout the day. See if you can pinpoint any underlying intolerance, Otherwise, a good place to start is a really generalized probiotic. So Saccharomyces boulardii is my favorite. That really helps with all sort of broad gastrointestinal issues. Puts that good bacteria back in there, but really helps with keeping that bloating and things down at discomfort.
Yeah.
And work with a professional.
Exactly. Yeah. If symptoms persist, go see someone, because you bring us the power. Like you empower us to take, control back over what we're doing and how we're feeling. And, when we feel amazing, I mean, what's better than that? Like, anything is possible, right? So
absolutely,
put your health first.
Oh, yes, you do. If you feel good, everything else flows. It's not always about those things that we measure, like weight. There's a lot more to it.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Jacqui. This has been brilliant. I appreciate your time.
Not a problem. Thanks so much for having me. It's been great.